She opened her door that night, expecting the storm to be the only danger. But what she found on her porch wasn't just a freezing family begging for help. It was the beginning of a chain of events that would expose a truth she thought only existed on the news. A truth she'd spent her whole life trying to believe people had grown past. She didn't know it yet, but by letting them in, she was stepping straight into a world of fear, judgment, and injustice she never imagined would reach her tiny home. And when those luxury cars showed up days later, everything she thought she knew about people, race, and kindness shattered. What happened out there, and why were they really being watched? Evelyn Marshall had lived most of her 72 years tucked away in a quiet stretch of rural farmland, one of those places where winters were long, neighbors were scarce, and life felt suspended in time. Her days were simple and predictable, tending the stove that never quite kept the cold out, sorting Marcus's medication, stretching groceries further than anyone her age should have to, and praying the next disability check would come before the refrigerator went empty again. Hardship had worn them down, but routine kept them steady. It was a life built on survival, patience, and kindness habits, learned long before she ever knew they'd matter. Most mornings began with the same ritual. She'd help Marcus into his chair, adjust his oxygen line, and set a cup of weak coffee on the table beside him. They'd watch the sun come up through frost-coated windows, talking softly about little things, weather, bills, the aches that came with age. Outside, the world stayed quiet and distant. They liked it that way. Out here, trouble usually passed them by. But beneath that quiet, Evelyn carried something else, a memory, the kind that settles deep and never fully fades. Growing up in the South, in the 1,950 seconds, she'd seen what racism could do, how it shattered families, stole opportunities, and lingered like a shadow even when everyone pretended it was gone. She'd promised herself she would never become hardened like so many around her, never look the other way when someone needed help. Even now, decades later, she held on to that promise, though life had given her plenty of reasons to doubt whether kindness still mattered. She didn't know it, but that belief was about to be tested in a way she never expected. The storm arrived faster than the forecasts warned, thick, violent snow swallowing the land, until the world vanished beyond her porch. The lights went out before evening had fully settled. By nightfall, the wind screamed like something alive, shaking the old farmhouse until Evelyn wondered if the roof might lift clean off. She wrapped blankets around Marcus, checked the fire again and again, and told herself the storm would pass by morning. But something felt off, a heaviness in the air she couldn't explain, as if the night itself were waiting. She had no way of knowing that miles away, a young couple was fighting their own battle against the storm. No way of knowing the fear they carried or the silent danger tracking them long before they ever reached her door. No way of knowing how the color of their skin had shaped every moment leading up to that desperate knock, how assumptions, suspicion, and prejudice had pushed them into decisions that would lead them straight to her doorstep. For now, all Evelyn knew was the cold, the dark, and the unsettling sense that the night wasn't finished with her. Before sunrise, something was going to happen that would pull her from her familiar world and into a reality she thought she'd left behind decades ago. A reality she never imagined would reach her quiet life again. Something was coming, and it was already on its way. The knock came again, harder this time, sharp enough to cut through the roar of the storm. Evelyn's heart lurched. People didn't come out here at night, let alone in a blizzard that could kill a grown man in minutes. But when she opened the door, the sight on her porch stole her breath. A young black couple, soaked to the bone, shivering violently. The woman heavily pregnant and barely able to stand. Their skin looked pale under the frost, their fear even paler beneath that. Evelyn let them in without thinking. Kindness acted before fear could speak. She didn't know their names, their story, or why they looked like they'd fled something worse than the storm, but her gut told her these were people in real trouble. As she wrapped the woman in blankets and coaxed warmth back into her limbs, Evelyn noticed details she hadn't at first. The man's expensive watch, the woman's engagement ring shining even through the frost, the quality of their coats. These weren't drifters or wanderers. These were people who came from a world far removed from her small farmhouse, and yet tonight, they had nowhere else to go. But beneath their gratitude, she sensed something else. A tension that didn't come from the cold. A quiet, quivering fear that lingered even after they were safe inside. When their hands stopped shaking enough to speak, the truth came out. Their car had died in the storm. Yes, but that wasn't all. They tried flagging down help hours earlier. Car after car had passed them on the highway shoulder, slowing just enough for a driver to look out. See a young black man waving both arms. See a pregnant black woman hunched in the passenger seat, then speed away without even cracking a window. No offer to call for help, no concern, just glances sharp enough to cut. And then there was the pickup truck. The one that tailed them for nearly 5 miles. No headlights at first, just the quiet, predatory crawl of tires behind them in the dark. When they'd slowed, it slowed. When they turned, it turned. They didn't know if it was curiosity, suspicion, or something darker, but the weight of that unspoken threat pressed on them even now. The storm had forced them off the road, but fear had kept them moving long after they should have stopped. The last thing they remembered was seeing a faint porch light through the blizzard Evelyn's house, the only refuge in sight. As Evelyn listened, heat rose in her chest. Anger, not the loud kind, but the deep, heavy kind that made her bones ache. She knew what it felt like to be judged by the color of your skin, to be dismissed, avoided, feared. She'd seen it all her life. And now, in her own living room, she was staring at the consequences of it. 2 young people who'd nearly died because strangers refused to see their humanity. Throughout the night, Evelyn kept checking on them. The woman's contractions were irregular, stress-driven, but every one made Evelyn's heart squeeze. She prayed the baby would wait. They didn't have the strength, the supplies, or the time for anything to go wrong. By dawn, the storm had eased, but the fear in the house hadn't, because that's when the first engine was heard outside. A single car at first, tires crunching through the ice, then a second, then a third, and within minutes, the quiet farmland around them filled with engines all idling, all expensive, not the kind that showed up anywhere near a place like theirs. Evelyn stepped to the window and froze. A line of luxury SUVs and black sedans stretched down her driveway, and into the road, more than a dozen, maybe more, figures stepped out wearing sharp coats and earpieces, scanning the property with a purpose that made her blood run cold. These weren't neighbors. These weren't rescuers. These were people looking for someone. Behind her, the couple exchanged a terrified glance, a glance that told Evelyn everything she needed to know. Whoever was outside wasn't here to help. They were here because of them. And before Evelyn could even speak, more doors slammed, more figures approached, and a sinking dread filled the room. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be simple, and it wasn't going to be safe. Evelyn had faced storms before, but nothing prepared her for the sight of a dozen strangers pushing through the snow toward her porchmen in tailored coats, speaking into earpieces, scanning her windows as if she were the threat. The young couple huddled behind her, their fear sharp enough to thicken the air. When the first man stepped forward, his voice was cold, practiced, and dripping with entitlement. "We're here for them," he said, pointing past Evelyn without even looking at her. "Move aside." He didn't ask. He commanded. Evelyn felt something ignite in her chest. The same fire that had carried her through the protests of the 60 seconds, through the stares, through the whispers that never faded. She stood her ground, her frail body suddenly feeling heavier, stronger. "They're not going anywhere," she said quietly. The man's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, towering over her, snow melting on his shoulders like steam off a machine. "You don't understand," he hissed. "They stole from us. They ran." Behind Evelyn, the young man's knees buckled not from guilt, but from exhaustion. "We didn't steal anything," he whispered. "We asked for help. They treated us like criminals." But the man in the suit didn't even glance at him. That's what they all say. Those 4 words sliced through the room. Evelyn had heard them her whole life, spoken by people who judged before they listened, who assumed before they asked. And now, here it was again. The quiet poison of racism, wearing a polished suit, standing on her doorstep. The men advanced, pushing past her. The young woman clutched her stomach, a sharp cry tearing from her lips, another contraction, stronger this time. The sound froze everyone, even the suited men. "She's in labor," Evelyn snapped. "And if any of you had an ounce of humanity, you'd step back." But one man didn't. He reached for the young husband, grabbing his arm hard enough to make him gasp. "You're coming with us." In an instant, the room erupted. The husband lunged to protect his wife. Evelyn shoved the man's hand away with more force than she knew she had. The wife cried out again, collapsing to her knees. And for a moment, the entire world narrowed to a single, terrifying thought. This is how people die, not from storms, but from being seen as less than human. Then sirens wailed in the distance. Not the subtle hum of SUVs, not the quiet crunch of snow. Real sirens, approaching fast. Every head turned, every breath held. Help was coming, or something far worse. And in that razor-thin pause, everything hung in the balance. The sirens cut through the chaos like a blade. The suited men froze, uncertainty cracking their confidence for the first time that night. 2 deputies stepped into the doorway, local officers who actually knew Evelyn, knew her property, knew her character. And when they saw the terrified couple, the woman in active labor, and the men crowding the porch, their expressions shifted immediately. It didn't take long for the truth to unravel. The couple hadn't stolen anything. They'd been mistaken for intruders at an upscale resort where they'd booked a weekend stay, profiled the moment they walked in. When they asked for help during the storm, the staff called security instead of roadside assistance. The men who followed them were private officers sent to retrieve them, no questions asked. In the end, it wasn't the cold that pushed this young couple to the edge. It was the assumption that people who looked like them didn't belong. The deputies escorted the security team off her property. An ambulance arrived, and in the soft blue glow of dawn, with snow still settling on the ground, a healthy baby girl came crying into the world, safe, warm, and surrounded by people who finally saw her parents for who they were, not who they were feared to be. In the quiet that followed, Evelyn felt the weight of the night settle on her shoulders. She had lived long enough to hope things were changing. But watching that couple hold their newborn with trembling hands, she realized something hard. Storms may pass, but the kind built from prejudice, fear, and suspicion, those linger. Those follow people even when they've done nothing but exist. And so, the question remains, how many more doors will be knocked on out of desperation before the world stops judging who deserves help and who doesn't? Because stories like this shouldn't keep happening, but they do. What will you do with that truth?